Welcome to Rotary Reads, number 5. My name is Dave Bennett. I'm a member of the Rotary Club here in Neepawa, Manitoba. Rotary International is a worldwide organization with 1.2 million members worldwide in about 40,000 different clubs in 129 different countries. A magazine is published monthly and sent to all members, simply called Rotary. A number of articles in there of great interest, we feel, to the general public, and we hope that you're enjoying some of the articles that we read. My guest today and guest reader is Christine Waddell, who is a corporate member of our club. Rotary has changed their membership criteria over the years. Of course, women were initially not admitted to Rotary, shameful as that would seem right now, but probably at least 25 years ago, ladies were admitted, and Neepawa has had members for over 20 years, I know, 25 okay. I'm sure. But since then, corporate membership has been allowed, as well as there's actually some electronic memberships. There's some e-clubs existing in the Rotary world that meet over the internet strictly, and they have members from all over the world in one club. So we'll maybe do a program on that sometime.
That's fascinating. We have some good electronic wizards in our club.
Correct.
We do.
Yes, yes. So as the corporate membership, the Neepawa Banner, and became Neepawa Banner and Press, joined our club, I'm thinking 6 or 7 years ago, Chris. Yeah. And you and Ken have attended when you could, of course, and John Drinkwater did too. So it's great to have members, and it's been a great relationship that we've had with the Banner and Press and the Rotary Club. Satisfactory to us both, I'm sure.
Very, very satisfactory. It is. We have known Rotarians since we came to this community as with the Department of Agriculture 50 years ago. So Rotary, we recognize the role that it plays in leadership and in training in our community, and it's greatly appreciated.
Well, we're looking for more members too, so if anybody's interested, you can get a hold of me or Chris. She gives a good commendation. Well, let's get to the program.
Okay.
And Chris, you've chosen an article regarding polio, and I know that's very timely. You chose it particularly how it fits with COVID, so well, I'll let you take the lead.
Because we're a corporate member, we haven't been receiving the magazines, and when Dave asked me to read, he gave me 2 or 3 magazines, and they were open to strategic pages, let's put it that way. But I thought this one, and the fact that it's dated, the magazine came out November 2019, and this is now March 2021. And it's about the price of polio. And it was a series of 5 interviews with the story of 5 Rotarians, but I will only read 3. And the long-term effects of the disease polio. When you go to your Rotary Club, and this is the opening of it, when you go to your Rotary Club meeting this week, look around at your fellow members and think about this. In North America, anyone younger than 70 likely doesn't remember a time before polio vaccine. Those under 40 were born after polio was no longer endemic in North America. And among your club's youngest members, the very word polio probably conjures up a bygone age when children regularly died of diseases like measles, smallpox, or whooping cough. Now, however, we know that measles is staging a comeback. Tuberculosis, which might bring to mind mid-19th century sanitariums, is gaining greater resistance to treatment. Until a disease is really gone, eradicated, extirpated from the planet, it will always be looking for ways to come back for breaches in our defenses. We've come very far in the 64 years since the introduction of Jonas Salk's vaccine, and especially in the 40 years since Rotary decided to take on polio. Every day it gets easier to forget why it's so critical that we eradicate this disease. Most of us don't see polio in our daily lives. Whole generations have never experienced its terrifying power. We let our guard down when we think that polio is a disease that happens only in faraway places, or that almost eradicated is good enough. But if we stop and remember what it was like when polio was everywhere and people felt powerless against it, we know that if we don't finish the fight, we'll soon be back where we started. And the following excerpts are stories of people, Rotarians from the United States, who experienced the disease. And the first is Ann Wade from New Tampa, Florida. I felt like I'd entered another world. Beds with paralyzed children lined every wall. I was put into a big room. There were rows and rows of children, probably about 50 children, and 3 or 4 nurses to care for us. I was 7 when I was transferred to Hope Haven Children's Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, where I spent 4 months learning how to walk again. I missed my mother so much. When she would visit, I'd ask her why she couldn't come more often. But parents weren't allowed to visit were only allowed to visit on Wednesdays and Sundays. I still don't know why. I'd cry myself to sleep every night. The nurses used to get so cross with me, they would say I was too old to cry. I spent Thanksgiving, Christmas, and my birthday in that hospital. At first, I was bedridden. Polio had affected my legs, and I couldn't walk. When I got the virus, I had extreme pain all over my body and a high fever. I couldn't stand up. That was very scary. My parents took me to the doctor on a Saturday morning. He examined me and immediately sent me to an isolation ward. I had my own room there, but only the nurses could be with me. There was a balcony that extended around the building, and each room had a window. There were 2 chairs on the balcony outside every room, and that's where parents would sit and talk to their children through the window. Does it sound familiar? No one was allowed into my room, and I was not allowed to go out. Once my fever broke, I wasn't contagious anymore. I was moved to Hope Haven to learn to walk again. The therapies were painful. They would put hot, wet towels on my legs and then exercise the muscles. The nurses would also massage my legs with oil. Sometimes they would use electric shock things to shock the muscles into use. They would take all of us to therapy once or twice per day. In between, teachers came in and we had school. They'd roll my bed into a huge room, and the teachers would be there teaching. It was the beginning of 2nd grade for me. Once I started walking, I was released from the hospital, but I didn't return to my old school until 3rd grade. After I left the hospital, I tried to put it out of my mind. Then the vaccine was released and everyone went to get it. It was being given at a school on a Sunday afternoon. They called it Sabin Sunday, after Albert Sabin, who invented the oral vaccine, and I remember standing in a really long line thinking, do I really need to do this? I've already had polio. But my mother was adamant that my brother and I get vaccinated. Since then, I have done most everything I wanted to do in my life. I became a teacher. I married a wonderful guy 53 years ago who is also in Rotary. I have 3 children and 10 grandchildren. Not many people know I had polio, except that one of my legs is smaller than the other and I have a slight limp. About 12 years ago, I fell and broke the hip in my bad leg. After surgery, I was able to learn to walk again. So now I can say I have learned to walk 3 times. This year, I'm president of my Rotary Club. I'm eager to make eradicating polio a priority and to raise money for End Polio Now. Until now, I haven't told many people my story, but if it can help eradication effort, it seems like a good time to start.
Yeah, that's a great article, Chris. I really, the point you paused when you got to that sentence about no one was allowed into my room, and how evident that is right now. These were children, and now it's our seniors. So it's the other end of the spectrum, but the same concept.
In that case, the child was actively could spread the disease. In these cases, we're not sure where the disease is, and so there's a lot of precautions being taken.
They weren't really sure how spread for sure, and how to contain it and control it, and so they, when they were infectious. So,
Yeah.
so isolation was their best way of stopping
best
spread.
tool.
Yeah.
This second one is very emotional. Carl Chinnery, Rotary Club of Lee Summit, Missouri. There were 5 children in my family, all boys. In 1942, every one of us got polio. My oldest brother George died. My middle brother spent months in an iron lung. I was so young that I don't remember having the virus, but I grew up with its effects on our family, all around me. George's photograph sat on our fireplace mantel. He had been afraid of the dark. So my parents plugged in a nightlight next to it. But as time went on, few people even knew I'd had the disease. In 1999, I was appointed Polio Plus chair for my district. That's when I asked my mother to tell me about our family's experience with polio. At first, she said she couldn't talk about it. It was too painful. But a few weeks later, she surprised me with a letter. I'm sharing it now in the hope that our story will help my fellow Rotarians understand why we must continue to fight this disease until it's eradicated. And this is his mother's words. It must have been August 7th, 1942, when Bill came in and announced he had poliomyelitis. I didn't know where he had heard of such a thing, but I said, if you have poliomyelitis, you go straight up to bed and stay there. And he did. He really did feel bad. Then George became ill. I called Dr. Eldridge, our pediatrician, on the night of August 11th. 4 days later, George couldn't swallow his medication. It came back through his nose. I called the doctor again, and he came right over. Dad was on the road. Dr. Eldridge took George and me to Old General Hospital. No other hospital in Kansas City would accept us. They took George, but they wouldn't let me stay. I went home and called Dad. He started home immediately, drove all night, and went to the hospital about 4 a.m., but they wouldn't let him in either. At 7 a.m., the hospital called and said George was dying. When we arrived, George was already gone. By that time, Richard, Larry, and Carl had also become ill. And when I got home from the hospital, Richard was much worse, and we rushed him to the hospital. When we marched in, I informed them I was staying. I had lost one child, and I was staying, no matter what. Dad and I took turns, so Richard always had one of us there. One of Dad's aunts had come to help and stayed with Bill, Larry, and Carl. Dad sent someone to take me to the funeral home to see George. When I got back to the hospital, Richard wasn't doing well, and in the night I saw his skin sink into his chest. All I could see were bones with skin, drawn tight. I ran as fast as I could down the hall, calling the intern. We ran back, and this man picked Richard up and plunked him into an iron lung. His lungs had collapsed. When we went home, we had to start the Kenny treatments. We had to tear woolen blankets into strips and put them in boiling water, run them through a tight wringer, and place them on each child for so many minutes, and then off for so many minutes, and then on, etc. Dad put a hot plate in the upstairs bathroom to boil the water. He put an old wringer over the tub with stacks of wool strips handy. Bill was on his way to recovery, but Richard, Larry, and Carl were the sick ones now. Dad hired nurses to help during the day, and my dear mother drove from California to help. People came from everywhere to give us hope and offer to help, but they couldn't come in the house. When the boys were well enough, we had to start therapy. Compliments of the March of Dimes. And here I'll pause because I remember the March of Dimes. I remember a little card, and it had slots to put those little blue-nosed dimes into in our little, and we had a little country school. I was in a one-room 8th grade school, and I remember the March of Dimes, and I don't think I realized what it was really doing. It's still in effect today, the March of Dimes.
Yeah. I recall that they handed out the cards at school, and we all got them and so on. I really didn't have the concept of the world and how my dollar, 10 dimes, would help or whatever. At that time, I didn't have a global concept, I guess.
Yeah, but, and it's in the month of March that the March of Dimes, so that we happen to be reading this article now is timely.
Right.
And the mother goes on to say, I took my children and another lady in her leg braces and her little boy 3 times a week to the therapy. Richard has one leg a little shorter than the other. Carl's chest didn't fill out. Bill had many problems. And of course, we had one little angel boy in heaven.
She went through quite some time there, all of her children having polio.
All of
Yeah.
her children, and losing one and not being able to be there. And again, that resonates with where we're at
Right, yes.
right now.
I thought when you were reading that of the long haul that people would have afterwards, and we have polio, people in our community that had polio and so on, their after effects. And you think about the long haulers of COVID, they haven't really figured out for sure how these people, they've had 6 months of it and
Yes.
and they're calling them long haulers, I understand. So it's tying together the COVID and the polio concept again.
Yeah. The third story, the written, the story of John Nani from the Rotary Club of Middletown, Odessa, Delaware. And his story, he was only an infant. When I was 10 months old, I was paralyzed from the neck down by polio. I had been in the hospital for about a week when my great-great-aunt came to visit. She was a nun and had spent most of her adult life working as a nurse in a polio ward. She looked at my chart, saw that the doctors weren't doing what they needed to do to prevent my muscles from atrophying. My great-great-aunt believed in a method developed by an Australian nurse named Sister Kenny, and the Kenny method was referred to in the previous article.
Right.
It was a physical therapy program for polio patients that manipulated and stretched the paralyzed muscles. But at the hospital, they were putting kids in casts. It was the worst thing to do, but they didn't know. Not moving the paralyzed limb caused the muscles to shrink and weaken, and those children had to have many painful corrective surgeries. After my great-great-aunt visited, my mom decided to bring me home and perform the Sister Kenny method herself. She said I would wail in pain every time she exercised my limbs, and she had to do it every other hour, all day and all night, for 6 months. She was pregnant at the time and also had my 3-year-old brother to care for. Without her strong will and determination, I would never have walked. I'm blessed that she had the fortitude to do that. A year later, I took my first step. As I grew up, most people never knew I had had polio. My mom did such a good job, very few of my muscles atrophied. I played baseball, basketball, and football. I worked in restaurants, which is very physically demanding. I started a business. At one time, if you went to a Burger King anywhere between Maine and South Carolina, your receipt was printed on paper from my paper and ribbon supply company. But when I turned 40, I started to have weakness, pain, and extreme fatigue. It got so bad, I had to retire. I went to 10 different doctors over 2 years before a doctor identified it as post-polio syndrome. Hearing polio hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought it had come back, but the virus hadn't come back. The muscles that had compensated for my damaged muscles were starting to fail from overuse. Now I'm in a wheelchair, but for all but about 200 to 300 steps per day. I'm in the chair to protect my ability to walk. I have had to avoid overusing my muscles. I can't lift weights or do resistance exercises. About 70% of polio survivors have post-polio syndrome, yet it's still widely misunderstood and often misdiagnosed. About 4 years ago, I attached a sign to my wheelchair, and Dave has the picture of him in his wheelchair, which you may be able to see it. And Sorry.
Do you have the picture there too?
I don't have the
No,
picture, but
I just want to read what's on his wheelchair. He has a little sign there which says 65 years later, this is what polio looks like when a child is not vaccinated. So he carries that on his wheelchair all the time to remind people.
so he did this he wanted to bring attention to eradicating polio and to the importance of vaccinations. And one day he was at Yankee Stadium and a woman came and asked if she could take a picture of my sign. And I said, sure, why? She said her daughter-in-law refuses to vaccinate her children, and the woman wanted to show her this picture. Here in Delaware, the combined vaccination rate is 77%, which is well below herd immunity rates for many diseases. As I've gotten more and more involved with Polio Plus through the Rotary, I've become concerned with the declining level of vaccination rates in the United States. I'm in this chair because there wasn't a vaccine for polio when I got the virus in 1953, but no matter how dedicated Rotary members are to eradicating polio, many of them know very little about the disease. So I'm trying to do my part to educate people about my experience. It was 1955 when Jonas Salk, the vaccine became available.
Right.
So it was 2 years after he had his virus. There is a lot of suffering for polio survivors. That is why we must keep fighting this disease. So many positives are occurring in the eradication campaign right now. We are that close to a polio-free world. The money is not going down the drain. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep the promise that Rotarians made to the kids of the world back in 1985. And so it's 40 plus years since Rotarians have started their campaign to help eradicate polio. And I know it's part of the program here in Neepawa, is it not, Dave?
Definitely, yeah. So we are all Paul Harris Awards, which we've had on the station here. A lot of the money that is donated there goes towards Polio Plus. And we also have had polio days here in Neepawa. October 24th, I think, is the date each year designated for called Polio Day. And we try to have something at that time if we can. Just might mention that polio, we're like that close to eliminating it. 2 countries are still endemic, have polio, and that's Pakistan and Afghanistan. So we've been able to eradicate it, or no case for 3 years. South Africa was the last, I think, the African peninsula or continent, I guess the right word is polio free now. So it's really, really close. But they say, I checked something online yesterday and found that if all the efforts for polio eradication stopped today, within 10 years, it would only take 10 years, and we would have 200,000 children per year affected with polio. So we can't give up, we have to keep going.
And the interesting thing is, when I think vaccine, I think of a needle in the arm.
Right.
But the Salk vaccine was oral. It was on a sugar cube.
Yep.
And I can remember having that
Exactly,
at
yeah.
school when I was a
They
child.
use a little eyedropper kind of a thing,
Yeah,
and drop
and
a drop on the child's tongue now. We've got lots of pictures of that happening.
And they go into the developing countries, and because of the work of Rotarians and probably other organizations as well,
Yeah, they partner with World Health and so.
partner with World Health. Then, as far as I know, there is no cost to those families when they line up in that line.
No.
So-
All the cost is borne by donations from
and
Rotarians and those that we get donations from.
So
That's right, yeah.
it is a tremendous effort.
Yeah.
But when we think of what we're dealing with now, and this attacked children, everyone is susceptible to COVID-19, but that was children. Now you've got some interesting things that you dug out of our archives.
Well, it's quite interesting. This I found out the other day is the 70th anniversary of the Rotary Club of Neepawa. And I knew it was coming up. We had a large celebration at our Paul Harris 20 years ago, which was the 50th anniversary of that, and invited back some of the charter members. And I think we had 4. There were 6 charter members alive at that time. And I think maybe 3 or 4 of them came that night. None of them are alive now 20 years later.
Yeah.
But I actually have the original charter night handout that they had, the little program from there. And it was quite interesting. It was at the Legion Hall at 6:30 p.m. On Friday, April the 6th, 1951. And the charter members are listed there. I just thought maybe I would read them. People might recognize a few of the names. Reverend Doug Anderson, he was at the Presbyterian Church, if I recall correctly. Al Bages was a hardware store where It's Time is right now. Milt Baker, I'm not sure of that name, or I don't know that person. Jim Bell, one of the many Bell from Neepawa. Scotty Bennett, who is my father, and he was a charter member at that time. He was the Imperial Oil agent, bulk agent. Roy Burney, a couple of Roy's sons are still in town here. They ran a tire shop up the west end of town. Morley Forsyth, I think he was involved in heavy equipment and so on. Bill Gwynn from Marble Works was a charter member. Bob Greentree, I know the name, but I'm not sure what he did. Bill Johnson, Jack Johnston was a charter member. I know him from selling cars at Murray's Garage, I think. Ron Jones, Frankie Lee. Now, Frankie Lee was the Bamboo Gardens for many, many years, owner, operator of the Bamboo Gardens. George McKidd, Glenn McClure, Angus McDougall, McDougall's Garage was in town here in Neepawa at that time. Rolf Mills, Ken Ramstad, Al Showman. I knew Al quite well. He was a great friend of my father. He ran the economy department store, which is where the dollar store is right now. Yeah. Jack Thomas from Thomas Window over there, Jack, and Lou Vivian, the hotelier, the brothers involved there as such. There were 21 members that started the Neepawa Rotary Club on April the 6th, 1951. So thank you to those for getting it going. And we have to thank the Minnedosa Club because they sponsored and got the Neepawa Club going. And that night there were Rotarians from all over the community that came. And they list on here about it. Over 20 members from the Minnedosa Rotary Club that were there, and a lot from the Rotary Clubs of Brandon, even some from Flin Flon and Winnipeg and Selkirk. And Dauphin too, apparently, that were there. So it was a great night and a great start to Rotary, and thank you to all of them that were involved. So there's my little announcement. So
that's no mean feat to continue on for that many years, and and the sons are carrying on the tradition. Your dad was a...
I'm probably the only son of the group that is presently in Rotary here. Some others were at times, and maybe elsewhere as well. I don't know. You know that there are a lot of Rotary becomes a family operation. In fact, our club membership has now changed to be a family membership, so that family are considered members as well. So,
which in our day and age it works well, and we look forward to gatherings where we can actually physically be together again.
We have about 10 minutes left.
Oh my
Chris,
goodness!
so,
well, I'm going to skip over. I had a Canadian article, and it was about tree planting, and it is very interesting. Perhaps another time someone else can deal with that.
Or you can come back.
Or I could come back. The other one I want to touch on, and I will read some of it, is very international, and it's from India. And I took time to Google the person in the story, Binish Desai, from India, and all I got typed in was Binish, B-I-N-I-S-H, and he was there. He was the top of the list in my Google search. Bang there. So here's a little bit of story about Binish Desai. And I know I won't be able to read the entire thing because it is quite an extensive article. It's from the Rotarian magazine of August 2020. And as a shy student, Binish Desai got a boost from Rotary. Now with members of his new Rotary Club, he's returning the favor. Every hero has an origin story. And this is what Binish has to say. I was 10 years old when the entire journey started. It began with a cartoon called Captain Planet, an animated TV series from the 1990s about an environmentalist with superpowers. It was Captain Planet, he's our hero, gonna take pollution back down to zero. That tagline stuck in my mind. I wanted to do something to help Captain Planet. Growing up in Valsad, a city on the Arabian Sea in west central India, Desai also was a fan of Dexter's Laboratory, another animated TV show, and perhaps these are shows that children watched in North America. My children were well past that. Perhaps my grandchildren saw them. And it was a story about a boy scientist. So I created my own lab in the corner of our living room on in a TV cabinet, and I would always carry something called a bag of ideas where I would jot down different innovations of mine. For instance, having learned about evaporation and condensation in school, he noticed that steam escaped from the pressure cooker when his mother prepared dinner. He created a device to capture that steam, which would then return to its liquid state, water, that could be used for gardening. That was my first invention ever. There is nothing that is useless in this world, Desai insists. The concept of waste does not exist in nature. It's human consumption that creates it, so it's our responsibility to get rid of it. And then in the process of converting trash into treasure, we can also generate a lot of employment. In the nearly 2 decades since his Captain Planet days, Desai turned 27 a year ago, he has come up with more inventions, built and lost a company, founded with his wife several women's empowerment centers, and generally concocted ways to improve the lives of everyone in his broadly defined community. Central to his success has been his involvement with Rotary, a relationship that was sparked by a family connection and nurtured by a year in the United States as a Rotary Exchange student. Now as a charter member of the Rotary Club of Vibrant Valsad, his life in Rotary has taken flight. Somebody hand that young man a cape. We're familiar with the Rotary Exchange program, and I know that has created lifelong relationships with young people all over the world. And that's where his story and his confidence began.
Yeah, well, their confidence, I mean, they come and they learn, they're away from home, and they really grow into young men and women while they're in the other country. And a lot of them go on to great things, you're right.
As Binish continued his scientific exploration, he kept inventing. The one that led me to the person I am today was the brick. That happened when I was 11 years old. Never underestimate a child. Never.
Wow.
One day in school, his best friend stuck a wad of chewed gum beneath the desk, and as fate would have it, the gum ended up getting stuck to Binish's pants. He peeled it off as best he could and wrapped it in a piece of paper, intending to throw it away when class was over. Then he forgot about it. At the end of the day, when he finally retrieved it from his pocket, it was rock hard. I thought, this is really different. I said, okay, I can make stone out of this. I was just a curious kid trying to figure out why did this happen. At this time in school, Binish was learning about how huge numbers of people were living in crowded and unhealthy slums. He formed a new ambition. One day he would build the world's least expensive house for those people, and he would build it with bricks made of chewing gum and waste paper. Over the days, weeks, and years that followed, Desai experimented with different ingredients and proportions, always trying to build a better brick. With each iteration, he sought to understand what was lacking and what could be improved. He made small molds out of cardboard and began designing and processing small, durable bricks with plans to build a dollhouse. I had no idea how. I went to cyber cafes and looked up stuff on the internet, That's how I learned the basics of how to construct a house. When he was 15, Desai completed the dollhouse using his bricks. He had demonstrated to his own satisfaction that his plan to build the world's least expensive house was sound. I started talking about my plan to my family and my friends. People started laughing about it. "You have gone crazy. How can you make something out of paper and chewing gum? It's not going to work." At 15, Desai was a self-described introvert, and his self-esteem was low. With people laughing at his ideas, he began to doubt himself, but fate had another twist in store for the young inventor. In 2009, I got selected as a Rotary Youth Exchange student. That is why I owe a lot to who I am today because of Rotary. Desai had applied for a short-term exchange, but things headed in a different direction when he went in for his interview. He told the Rotarians about his plans to build the world's least expensive house, and he finally found the receptive audience he had been seeking. The Rotarians encouraged him to apply for a longer exchange, and he spent his junior year at Waukegan High School in Illinois, about 40 miles north of downtown Chicago. One night, over a dinner of fried chicken, the floodgates opened. In an instant, the introvert had vanished, and he began telling his host parents, Patrick Jimerson and Theodora Teddy Anderson, about his bricks and his plans for the world's least expensive house. After listening attentively, Jimerson asked if Desai had a patent for his bricks. He did not. He also suggested that Desai might want to pursue this as a career. By the end of his exchange year, Desai says, he had transformed into a different person. I was friends with everyone, and everywhere I went, I would talk to people. I made new friends before I started sharing my inner thoughts, because I started sharing my inner thoughts about how I viewed the world. And he knew what direction he wanted his life to take. And he has maintained contact with Teddy, although Jimerson himself has passed away. And it goes on, and it's quite a lengthy article, and I'm sure that if we asked, I have a photocopy of it, and if you would like to read the entire thing, because it is very lengthy and interesting. But he did get a patent on his bricks, which is a good thing, and he has his doctoral, he's Dr. Binish, he's had it not just self-taught, and there's a phrase he uses, and it's called disruptive innovation. It's something that changes the perspective in people in a positive way. They start seeing things in a way that helps change the community. And he's done things to help women. He's married. He and his wife have done projects to help women be employed. He did start a business, and it's interesting. I made a note of it in the margins. One of the roles that Prime Minister Narendra Modi had was to launch a nationwide campaign. The English translation is Clean India Mission. It was to stop public defecation and to make public toilets available. And Binish saw his inexpensive, easy to make bricks, and they were made with offcuts from a gum factory. It's
amazing. Yeah, I read the rest of that article.
It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that Paul Harris, the founder of Rotary, did in 1907, over 100 years ago, was a service project that was community toilets. This harkens back to the day of public biffies, outhouses,
right.
Holes in the ground, buckets in the back porch. And India is a highly populated country, and public defecation and these things were there. And the fact that he did a company, they built these toilets, but he had to, other people in the company took it over on him, but he still had his, because of that trip to the United States, he had the patent for his bricks, and he still that was his, and he's continued it on and building houses and finding employment for, especially for women. His family at first was devastated because they were a well-to-do, he doesn't mention the word caste, but possibly the caste system, and you just didn't deal in waste and these things.
That's a great story, and it just kind of sums up what we've been talking about with the old, with the new. The Neepawa's Rotary Club, now 70 years old. The first project for Rotary was a toilet in downtown Chicago, and he's come up with this great innovation because he went on a Rotary exchange.
Because he went on a Rotary exchange.
That's tied that together very well. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming in today. You really enjoyed doing this, I can tell.
I like talking, but
well, you enjoyed the material as well. I can really tell that.
It is very, very fascinating.
So, viewers, I hope that you can join us again when next time we can bring you another Rotary Read. So, thank you for watching today.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build good? Will it better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? When we pay it forward, it will be returned. Is it the truth?